All right, Mark, this is so awesome to be here with you. This is an exciting moment for me, and what a great space to be in too, in your man
The
cave.
man cave with my fly tying gear and picture of Bill Landrum.
Yeah, right. He's a legend.
The
Like,
legend,
yeah, like you.
the legend, the man.
Yeah. Well, I
But
was coming up with lists of people that I could possibly have on the show, and of course you want to these big name people that are writing books, that are writing movies and stuff, but I couldn't pick a better person to have as a
well,
first
y-
guest
you
gift.
know, Marty, it's an honor. It's an honor, and yeah, it'll be fun. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, yeah, and definitely coming off a weekend with your grandson and my boy camping at the Bitterroot Lake,
Awesome.
fishing, boating.
It was fun.
Yeah, and I don't know if we call that fishing or not, but um,
Well, we tried.
we tried.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
I
right.
didn't. I didn't demonstrate my most excellent fishing skills, unfortunately, but we caught a couple.
Yeah, yeah. So what I'd love to do today is start out with your early life, and then kind of just work through your life and some of the choices and some of the things that set your trajectory in your early life, and then move into your later years in parenting, and then kind of the intersection of your career and kids and
Yeah,
raising boys, and
yeah.
just really give the guests a feel for what you believe boys are needing and what's important in their life. So, yeah, if you want to just start us off a little bit about your early years and what
Yeah.
set your trajectory for being the man you are.
I was born and raised in Port Angeles, Washington, out on the very, northwest tip of the United States and northwest tip of Washington State. And it was one of those locations, um, especially in the 60s when you're uh, old enough to ride a bike and that sort of thing. I mean, we would I'd leave in the morning on my bike and I'd go to the tennis courts or I'd go, you know, to this park or that park. And on a Saturday, you'd be back at 6 o'clock in the evening. To think of it now, was crazy, but it was such a great experience, lived by, uh, kind of a big valley that had woods and creeks and ponds and
Everything a boy wants.
everything a boy wanted, including a vacant lot, close by, and the fun you'd have just with that. But I mean, we were right in the city of Port Angeles, which was at the time maybe 15,000 people, so it wasn't a large city, but big enough to have everything you needed. And rode our bikes to elementary school, and I still remember in my mind. I mean, I can still picture the the ride home, which was mostly downhill, and just one of those childhood experiences. Lots of outdoor recreation. My dad and we connected through hunting and fishing, and we would camp, out on the Pacific coast, a state park called Claylock. We'd go there for 2 weeks every summer. It was like the highlight, the summer. But had two wonderful parents that loved God and loved us and loved other people. And the impact, of course, of that was, at the time you didn't know, but it was significant. But graduated from Port Angeles High School. We were the Rough Riders, and played basketball. Went on to play a couple years in college, which was fun in the Kirkland, Seattle area. And yeah, just had one of those childhood experiences and growing up that certainly wasn't without certain challenges, but boy, looking back, knowing what kids go through now and the amount of trauma and challenges in their lives, uh, I've told the story that all I had to do was get up, eat the breakfast my mom always had ready for me, go to school, and then when I was in high school, I had a part-time job at a grocery store, so getting to that job on time and working it and doing my homework and going to practice, and that was it. I mean, those were my responsibilities. And when I think of that lifestyle compared to what so many kids now are facing, it's vastly different. Um, and unfortunately, it's it's not an improvement
Yeah.
over what I had.
Yeah, and I would love to get to those differences in today versus when you were growing up. But I'd like to dig a little into your father because I know you have told me at some point that he broke the chain and that,
Yeah,
and so the
yeah,
importance of his messaging in your life and his,
yep,
how he was guiding you.
yeah. So my dad, as I mentioned to you earlier, sitting around the campfire this last weekend, he was, he left home, uh, left a abusive alcoholic father, um, that that was sold liquor during Prohibition and ended up in and out of prison because of it. But my dad left home um, at a young age, 16 years old, and was actually left this little farm in Minnesota. Followed his older sister out to Portland and worked there. Um, his first job was at Meyer and Frank, which was the forerunner of Fred Meyer,
Oh, wow.
yeah, the chain. So, but my dad then eventually ended up in Port Angeles and working at a plywood mill. Met my mom, and I shared with you that they wanted to get married, but the pastor wouldn't marry them because he didn't believe that my dad was a believer in Jesus, and that troubled my dad. And I don't know, he didn't talk a lot about it, but he said that really made him think, and made him see what my mom had in her life, and so it resulted in him giving his life to Christ. And in my mind, I see all these chains that were chains of, unfortunately, of neglect at times, and some abuse. And my grandpa was, he did his best, but he was a sinful guy. And I remember, even as a young kid, he ended up living outside of Port Angeles in a home that my dad provided. And I remember going by the we would drive by the tavern that he would hang out all the time. Bricky's was the name of it. I still have this. My dad would walk in. About 5 minutes later, they'd both come out. My grandpa staggering and angry at my dad. And so my dad would throw him in his car that was parked there. He would drive my grandpa's car home, and my mom would follow in our car. And then I remember my dad just getting my grandpa into his house. He'd be swinging at my dad, and it was crazy to watch as a kid, but it made me really realize the vices of this world, and how they can control one's life, and the negative impact. But so when my dad accepted Christ, I mean, I just saw all these chains, and based on patterns that we typically see, my dad had certainly was was prone to follow in my grandpa's footsteps. But when he accepted Jesus Christ into his life, and the change that brought, and I know, just in the stories that he would tell, he just, it was truly repentance. Him heading in one direction, and making a decision. This is not the way I want to go. Accepting Christ and literally turning around. And I think for my dad, it was not just turning around and walking, but it was like turning around and running to God. And because of that, these chains just fell off of him. And there is, boy, I can tell you story and story how that has impacted not only our family but my dad's family. He led several of his brothers and sisters to the Lord, and changed their lives as well for eternity. And so, that impact was significant. And my dad, I know he wanted to be a great father, and he was. And, by the leading of the Holy Spirit and, studying scripture, he was, he was a man uh, in so many ways after God's own heart. And I think of the scripture of, that how God described David, certainly lots of sin and baggage and mistakes, but yet, he was a man after God's own heart. And so that really changed my dad. And for that reason, he became a loving father. He became a faithful husband. He became, a man that was always wanting what God had for him. And, we attended church regularly. And probably one of the biggest, images I have is of course, back then Sunday night church was important, and it was sort of the service that there was always time to go and pray afterwards, and I remember seeing my dad up at that altar all the time, and the impact that had on my life, just just by example. It's not like he would talk a lot about it. He was not a man of a lot of words, but you could just tell from example, and he would at the same time lead his family, in uh, in God's ways and following Christ. And there was a little sign up in our living room that, for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, and that was there, from the day I remember till I left home, and the impact that had, and certainly my mom as well. Were both were very involved in our lives, and as I said, my sort of connection to my dad was the hunting and fishing aspect, and just growing up, and just the support that was provided. But more than anything else, just a just a great example. I've often said that my dad taught me not to take offense, and as an educator and school administrator and superintendent, I can't tell you how many times that served me well. Kids and families could be cussing me out on Wednesday, and I'm sitting down on Thursday with them trying to solve the issue and not taking offense. And my dad was that type of role model.
Yeah, and so I'm imagining when you're talking about him going to the altar, and that altar, is he going up there to pray for others, or is he going up there because he needs some prayer in his life?
I think both.
Okay.
He never like tonight I prayed. He never. I don't ever remember, but I just remember him going up, and I'm sure it was both. I mean, and I followed in those footsteps, so I can remember doing the same thing, and I remember thinking, I want my kids to have the same image. I mean, that same memory of seeing their dad at the altar. And I'm sure now, of course, as a kid, your dad could do no wrong. And how could my dad struggle with sin, or, those thoughts,
right.
But I'm sure he was there. He was there asking for forgiveness. He was there praying for us. He was there praying for other needs. I'm sure it was the full gamut, just like when I went up as a young adult and father, and, you had all kinds of needs that you just took to the Lord. And, I always have this image, of taking needs and issues, challenges to the Lord, and the scripture that talks about the fact that our burden, when we carry the burden, it's heavy, but when we carry when we surrender that, the Lord's burden, his yoke is light, and that's what he wants. He doesn't want us to carry all those things. And so in my mind, it's like I have this heavy backpack full of all these issues. And I go to the altar and I take that backpack off and I lay it there and I give him all those things, whatever they may be. And he's certainly been faithful.
So I'm hearing a lot of intentionality and humility mixed with service, and those are definitely things that what draws me to you and what has led me to call you up at different hours of the day. And as I'm walking around my house and walking around my yard and talking to you, asking questions about how to engage people at work, or about, early on about, gosh, am I in the Lord's will? And how do I walk through this? How do I be a father? I feel like I'm failing. And, I think it's important to note too that the beginning of my walk with the Lord, obviously he's in our lives and trying to reach out. But the turning point for me was after Paul Terry, after his memorial service, and
Yeah.
I coming, knowing that you were a man of God and I could approach you, and then beginning to go to church with you and to see you up on that altar with me, hands on me. You even anointed my head with oil.
Wow. I don't remember that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And, so these are moments
cool.
that are chain breakers, and
They are.
and moments in my life where the trajectory of my life changed. Now, but I also hear in your father, in you, and now in me too, that there is an imperfection, that we're not perfect. We're not going to get it right, but that we can recenter, and we find that center in, coming to the Lord or coming to a mentor and changing that. And so that intentionality, I saw this weekend as well as with those boys, and I've seen it in my life through you. And so what your dad started, you continued. And I wasn't in your home often around you and your family, but I'd like to know the things that were important to you as a father to focus on as you're raising your two kids.
Yeah. Great questions. And I always enjoy the phone calls too. So keep them coming.
Yeah. You, of course.
Especially now in retirement, Marty, you begin to like, okay, am I still significant, in other people's lives? So I appreciate that. But, yeah, in raising my children, and, intentionality is critical. Being intentional about things, being present, being conscious of the fact that, when my kids are around, I want to be present. I don't want to be, 100 miles away in my head, not even aware of what's going on. And I think my dad did a good job of that. And I don't think he was aware. In fact, I know for certain in my heart of hearts that God worked in his life, challenged him, and he was just being led by the Holy Spirit. I don't think he realized some of the things that he was doing and the impact they would have. But that's the great thing about the Holy Spirit, is that when we seek him and his will for our lives, then those things begin to that fruit begins to take become a part of our lives and produce fruit. And that's a supernatural cool thing about serving the Lord. But as far as my kids went, the thing that comes to mind more than anything else is that when they were in school, starting to go to school in parent-teacher conferences, I remember the first thing that we would ask every one of their teachers from kindergarten on through is, how are they treating, how is Melissa, how is Philip treating other people, other classmates, and how are they respecting you as a teacher? And that was the first thing because I knew in my heart of hearts, especially being an educator, I knew that if that wasn't there, I mean, they could be learning all of their letters and numbers and reading at, 3 grade levels above, but that was not going to serve them nearly as important as how they're treating other people and their classmates. And there was a little bit of with there was that a little struggle, especially with Philip when he was real young. He was very rambunctious, um but God got a hold of his heart too, and begin to change. But he was a little live wire when he was the first few years of school. But we would always ask that question, and we would always emphasize that. I remember a baseball game Philip was in, and we laugh about this now. And he was a good little player, usually better than most kids on his team. And he was playing first base, and the ball was hit to the second baseman. The second baseman bobbled it, didn't get it to him in time, and Philip is like, on first base with his mitt out, and I could see he was frustrated. And I'm coaching third base, and he's probably, my guess is he's probably 8, just starting. And so he throws his hat down and starts storming over to his second baseman. And I don't know what he's going to say or do to him, but he's like going to tell him, you got to, whatever. And I just take off from third base, and he doesn't even see me. And right before he gets to his teammate, I take one arm and just scoop him up, and we run off the field, or I carry him off the field. And I tell the coach, substitute, Philip's done for this game. And I remember afterwards he apologized to not only that teammate but to his team for losing his cool. And I'll tell you, it was personal for me, because growing up, through even playing college basketball, the one area where I would lose my cool was athletics. I remember having probably the most humbling experience in losing my temper, and it was again athletics that did it to me. I was in college, coming home in the summer, and we were playing on church softball team, slow pitch, but it was competitive. I mean, we were and we were one of the top teams, and I was the big home run hitter, and I took pride in that. And I remember, keep in mind, this is slow pitch. I remember a couple pitches coming in that I didn't want, but they were called for strikes. And the third pitch came, and I swung and missed, trying to just slam it out of the park. And I turned in frustration and threw my bat. And the bat, I still remember, it's like slow motion. I turned, let go of the bat before I could even see where it was going, but it was heading towards the end of the dugout. And one of my, there were adults playing on this team, that I'd grown up with. They were my, mentors in many ways, my youth pastor. And then this was a big game, and the stands were filled with people from my church, including my parents. And that bat, I could see it like slow motion going end over end, and it was headed right towards one of the kids, one of the children of one of the older players who had wandered out of the dugout, and missed him by about, 2 feet. And I still remember I was so humiliated and so embarrassed because I'm losing my cool. I just grabbed my mitt, walked out of the stadium, got in my car, and drove away. And I don't remember, I know I came back and finished the season. I hope that I apologized to folks, but I don't remember. It was, and so, I knew that was something that, plagued me in athletics, and I didn't want it, to plague my kids. So I was kind of probably a little bit more keenly aware of that. But that was one example, with Philip, and again, raising Melissa and Philip were, 99% of the time was an absolute joy. But there were those moments that our kids challenge us, and we have to, we have to show them always the love of Christ. But discipline is a part of love, and discipline. I always reminded myself, even as an educator and assistant principal that doled out discipline regularly, that discipline is to teach and instruct, and that's what the definition of discipline. And if you're not teaching and instructing, it's something other than discipline, and it's punitive. It's there's no connection between the consequence and the action, and I always strived, even not only with our kids, but as an educator, to discipline and to ensure that teaching and instruction were taking place.
Yeah. So I'm hearing that the character was more important than the product, the outcome, and then even in that discipline, that you are guiding them towards a greater character,
Yeah,
right?
it totally. I mean, athletics is great, but you might play tennis for the rest of your life. You might play golf but most of that stuff, you're not doing after a young age. But there again, it's as a coach and as an athletic director, there was value in the camaraderie, the support of other teammates, the discipline, of being a part of a team, the commitment. All of those things are great life skills. Unfortunately, we get too wrapped up in, how many touchdown passes were thrown, or
Sure.
what the batting average is, and you just have to keep, reminding yourself, whether it's you in that moment or your kids, that's minor compared to the more important things. Are they supporting their teammates, because they're going to have teammates the rest of their life at work or whatever the case may be, and most importantly, they're going to have a teammate and a spouse that is a critical decision in relationship, and how are they supporting them. So there's lots of carryover in lots of opportunities, and I know, for us, sports was, played an important part, but there's other things. I mean, lots of other things that can teach the same lessons.
Yeah. So the athletics became a vessel for character development and loving on people and serving people, and being part of something.
Yep. And it was at the same time, those things were important, but I missed out on youth football because they played on Sunday. And, we might have made a different decision with our kids, but for me as a kid, the games were on Sunday. Therefore, unfortunately you can't participate. And I was a little disappointed, but at the same time, in my heart of hearts, I respected that. And I knew that my parents were just, standing on principles that they believed in, and the how important that, that Sunday is. And that's another thing, that, our Sundays, it was the only day of the week my dad didn't work. But we recreated, we had fun, but church was always a priority. And I tried to follow that same pattern. Our kids even now talk about the fact that most Sundays we'd go to church, we'd come home, have something to eat, especially if it was during the school year. We'd have a few little, Philip always remembered helping me load the wood box for the week in the afternoon, but we always took a nap. We always took like a 2-hour nap. All of us. And to this day, Philip and Melissa still talk about how they love those Sunday afternoon naps. But it was a day that was set apart, and it was special, and my parents certainly modeled that. But it was just a lot of things that I think play a part in who we become, and how we then attempt to model that and be examples for others.
Yeah, I'm hearing that in there. And So as you, so then you were a coach, you were a
Yeah.
teacher,
Yeah.
administrator, um, superintendent was ultimately your last position before
Hmm.
retirement,
Right.
and um, so you have a really great perspective. You've seen kids as a coach and through all of those positions, and what stuck out to you or sticks out to you as the thing that boys are needing most during those times?
Yeah. you know, I say this, uh, and in no way saying that it can't be done when a young man is being raised by, say, a single mom. And, to a great extent, you're a great example of that. And um, not that, your father's in your life, but it was a different situation than certainly I had. But I would say that having significant men in their lives is really important. Men that can show care, compassion, empathy, and at the same time, a level of self discipline and leading by example. And I mean that can be a coach, that can be a youth pastor. I mean, I had lots of people in my lives that I look back on now, and I admired them and respected them, and they filled a part, from whether it was my youth pastor or my little league coach. I still remember his name. Still, I mean, he was an important uh, part. Um, so, those I think are key, and I think having, I think, and this is for boys and girls, but having a structure, having a routine, they find safety and security when there are boundaries and or side rails, so however you want to view it.
Yeah.
There is safety and security. I'm amazed at kids in our school systems that come from just less than ideal home situations, and they thrive when they are in a system of safety, security, and boundaries. And of course, we know that sometimes they buck some of those boundaries, but in the end, they benefit from them greatly.
Yeah, and oftentimes it seems like people are warring against those structures, the kids as well. But it it seems like there's, I wouldn't say always, but there's to some degree a push to lessen those boundaries, to
Yep,
widen those guardrails,
yep.
and I mean, what's the outcome of that?
Well, I've seen. I mean, eh, as a high school principal, I used to talk to freshman parents in the high school orientation, just freshmen and freshman parents. And I would say, having a ninth grader, I said I would compare it to holding a bar of wet soap. And I said, let's think about it. I have a bar of wet soap and it's your child. If I squeeze too hard, I'm going to lose the bar. If I don't provide enough support, I'm going to lose the bar. So either extreme,
Wow.
no boundaries or too tight of boundaries, you're going to lose the kid in some way, shape, or form. And so I said, the balance is just that right amount of support, right amount. You got to have the fingers around it, but you can't squeeze hard. Um, I would often say that I'd always say, know that just when your kid comes home and says everyone is doing it, everyone is going, please know that everyone is not doing it and everyone is not going. So, those are those perspectives. It's not like we don't believe or trust our kids, but even with my two, as great a kids as they were growing up, they would come home and present the situation, whatever it was, if they were in trouble or whatever, they would present it in their best light. And they'd leave out a few details. They not necessarily bold-faced lies to me, but they were leaving out a few details that probably were important. So, I would always stress that structure, that rules are there for a reason. And if the rule had, I would often say in schools, if don't make a expectation or rule that you can't follow through on, or that you can't enforce, because that's that there's not much sense in that. So let's rethink it. But just again, having clear expectations. The clearer the expectations, the better the outcomes. I mean, that's true in all walks of life, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And just continuing to have conversations, with kids, continuing to stress this is why we're doing this. It's the old, why do I have to learn, multiplication tables? Well, you should have some good examples as to why that's valuable, or, whatever it is that we do. There's reasons for it, and they may not understand it at the time, but in time, we know that they connect, and it those things begin to connect in their brain.
Yeah. Those are good mental pictures of, keeping them in the guardrails, but also that soap analogy. I'm gonna hold on to that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to hold on to it tight. Hopefully it doesn't slip through my hands. But I found early on with my firstborn son that, if we're using those guardrails as an analogy, and the center lane, the yellow lane, I was pretty heavy handed when he became of age where I thought he should be able to understand what I'm telling him in obedience. I thought I was guiding him well and providing structure, but if he would get off that yellow line just a little bit, I'd bump him back
Yeah.
on that. And he became angry. And so there was a moment where I had to pull back and say, okay, I need to allow him space within those guardrails. And then if he's coming to the danger of going off over the rails, right, off the cliff, off
Yeah,
the bridge, whatever you
exactly.
want to do,
Yep.
then I need to be a little bit more heavy handed there. But the other times I needed to be patient. And patience is not a strong suit of mine. It's not my, the first thing. And so, yeah, I mean, I like that analogy of just hold on tight enough, but not too tight or
Yep.
too loose.
Yep. And I think the guardrails is a great analogy, because it's, we know that the guardrails on a road are actually sit a couple feet off the roadway. And of course we don't, driving 2 inches from the guardrail is not a good idea, but you're not going to go off the cliff, So I think there's, I think of the majors and minors, and someone once told me, and maybe it was, I used to listen a lot to James Dobson, Focus on the Family. He provided a lot of great wisdom for parenting. But I remember someone told me, to say yes as often as you can to the things that are maybe just not that significant, because you're going to have to say no at some point on something that's really is significant and very important. And if your kids are always hearing no, 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 that, it becomes almost like, they're just not hearing you anymore. So, weigh those majors and minors. Is this something that, I'm really going to have, I'm going to take a stand on? Is it that important? Whereas if kids feel like you are, as a parent, are listening and saying, yes. And, a great one is yes, but not now, that was always a good one. But I think having those guardrails, knowing that you may not want them, hovering over here by the guardrail, but they're not going to go off the cliff at that point, and you're going to be able in time to get them back centered and focused. And so I think there's wisdom in that, and to be okay, and not freak out, and not, as far as parenting goes, that maybe they're they're over, a little off course, but they're still within the guardrails that you've set. And I remember this was just a few months ago at our church. There was a couple that are older than we are, so they're in their probably 70s, and they have older granddaughters. And I've met them before. They've always, introduced them, and very proud of them. And the couple came up to me a couple of months ago in church and said, "We have something, that is really bothering us. Very important. Can we talk?" And I said, "Sure." So we kind of walked off to the side, and they shared that their one of their granddaughters, who I'm going to say they're like out of high school even, um, colored their hair pink, and they are so concerned, and I I almost I had to make sure I didn't come out in a smirk or something like that. But I listened and I said, here's what I've learned. I said, there's kind of that majors and minors. And I said, I wouldn't stress over it. And you know what? I would just, I would continue to love them, of course, support them, and just, sort of in a sense, try to ignore it. Don't make a big deal of it. You don't have to compliment it, but, because I'll guarantee you a year from now, it's not going to be pink. And, so I think that it's just a good example of some things that, I'm just not gonna stress over that one. But there's certainly other things that, you would, and you would take different action on, but, pink hair is not one of them.
Yeah. 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 And I was talking to you a little bit about one of my kids who seems to be like he's, playing um what was it? Like a little bit of the victim,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yep,
which is tough for me because, I want him to be strong, but I think sometimes my messaging is doing the opposite. It's not encouraging strength. It's almost discouraging his emotions instead of,
yeah,
validating. And so it's a tough one for me
yeah.
at
I,
times.
the phrases that come to my mind is, and I'd use this a ton with even adults. Parents or staff members or kids, and that is, and again, you hope that it's showing some level of empathy, but I'm sorry you're feeling that way. I really am. But knowing I can't change it. I can't change you. I can't change how you feel. I can influence. I can maybe provide some alternatives. I can maybe provide some clarity. Let's rethink this. Let's think this through again to try to kind of refocus, what's important, what's not. But I'd always, I always use, I'm sorry you feel that way. And of course, if it was a situation where it involved me directly, I'd also say something like, boy, if I've done anything, if I've done anything to influence that, I really am sorry. I learned, I used at the beginning of my career, I'd say if I did anything to make you feel that way, I'm sorry, but that's, I don't say that anymore because I have a strong belief that I choose my feelings. I can choose to be happy. And Marty, if you're doing things that are making me feel certain ways, I'm choosing to feel that way. You're not making it happen. I'm choosing it. And so I always stress, with my kids and with my students and even staff that, hey, we choose our attitude. We choose, in many cases, our emotions. And, I can choose to be happy despite everything not going my way. And a lot of times with boys, particularly in conflict, it's like he did that on purpose. He made me react that way. And I'd say, no, he didn't. He might have influenced it. He might have made you angry. He might have made you frustrated, but you chose to react that way. You got to own that.
Right.
And, getting kids to own their actions and, um, and to get them to realize that if you if you're going to fly off the handle every time somebody looks at, I mean, sometimes it was like they looked at me, and I'd be in my office talking to them, and I'd always say, well, I'm looking at you right now. Is that you're going to be upset at me? I'm looking at you, and I really worked at helping them realize that if they let people control them, and their friends control them, they're going to be controlled the rest of their life, and they're going to have a roller coaster of a life, and it's not going to be pleasant. And so, owning one's emotions, owning one's decisions, knowing that I can influence, but I can't control others, and that includes our kids. I mean, I can't, at an early age, I mean, you can pick them up and carry them away and put it, I mean, but ultimately they need to realize the significance of their decisions, and the fact that, what, I don't want anyone else to control me other than myself. And of course, that also, factors into the leading of the Holy Spirit and the Lord in their lives, and asking for help, in those situations as well. So, yeah, interesting. Lots of dynamics there.
Yeah. Yeah. And the emotional control piece is a tough one for me in my house. So I think I can be just a moth to a flame with their emotions. So their emotions kick up, and I find myself actually, 44 years old, being the one that is, jumping on their emotional highs and
Yep.
lows, their roller
Yep.
coaster
Easy
ride.
to do.
Yeah, super easy to do. And I'm asking them from the time they were born till, my oldest is almost 12. So for 12 years, I've been asking them to be like on point emotionally. So just that idea that they do have emotions, that their emotions are based on the input that they're getting, and yeah, they have control. They're the ones that are responsible for that, but that slow guidance towards that emotional control, and allowing myself not to be, because I'm modeling
Yeah.
emotional instability
Yep.
when I do
Yep.
that,
Yep.
right?
Yep. It's early on in my teaching and administrative career. I was an assistant principal for 11 years before moving into the principal position. But, early on, it was a strange, when a kid was in trouble, typically you had, as an assistant principal, now as a teacher, you may have had a part of that, because it may have been an exchange in the classroom and between you and the student. But most of the time when I was dealing with a kid, I wasn't directly involved. Uh, and they did something that was inappropriate, whatever it may be. It was almost, early on, I kind of felt like I had to enter into this conversation with some level of emotion and be upset and raise my voice and kind of get in their face. And I realized fairly early that wasn't doing any good at all. And I didn't have to do that. It was almost like if I didn't do that, then I wasn't showing them that it was wrong or something. But I found that, just being, really sort of indifferent, meaning just having a calm, cool conversation,
Yeah.
not being emotionally. I remember some of the, based on training that I got, a lot of various factors, experience being one of the best. I would, reflective questions were so important, so a kid's sitting in my office and, this is the fourth time, in the last 2 weeks, and it's pretty much the same thing. I one of the best things I learned was simply saying, what do you want, Marty? What do you want? What do you want from this class? Do you want to pass this class? Yeah, they always wanted to pass the class. Do you want to graduate from high school? Yeah, yeah, I want to graduate from high school. Okay, that's great. So then my next question was, is what you're doing going to get you what you want? If you continue to behave this way, what's going to happen? Well, I'm going to be in trouble. I'm going to, probably fail the class. I'm going to maybe get kicked out of school, whatever it may be. Um, and I'd say, so is that what you want? No, I don't want that. So then I'd say, okay, so you're saying that you're acting this way, it's leading you down this path, but you don't want that, the consequences of that. Is that logical thinking? Is that, no, it's not. So now what do we got to do? So here's the things you just said you want. So what are things that you have to start doing in order to get what you want? And of course, that's an easy conversation to have. For most of us, it's a really hard task to change those old patterns and start new. And I tell kids, I'd say, who's the smart kid in your class? Who's the kid that's good? And they always would know. And I say, what are they doing? What are they doing to do that? And they'd rattle off all the things that they did really clear. And I'd say, just start copying. Just start pretending that you're that student, and just I'd say, just be a copycat. I mean, meaning just sort of begin to pattern your after what this other kid is doing in the class, because they're having success, and you're just telling me that's what you want too. So let's start doing some of those things. But again, easier said than done. But just those reflective, and I felt so much better because I had it, having a calm, cool discussion with someone is so much nicer than sometimes the emotion. And, unfortunately, I started my career at a time where there was still sort of this, heavy-handed, discipline, punishment. Many times the punishment didn't match what the behavior was, which didn't make any sense. And I've learned over the years a lot of things in regards to that. But I realizing the impact that meaningful conversations would have, and then walking into my office and realizing that I'm not mad at them, and I'm just here to help you. And yeah, there's probably going to be some consequences, because there's always some level of consequence. But even those consequences over time, as I grew professionally, those consequences changed as well, to hopefully be more meaningful, be more tied to teaching and learning, and be much more connected to, the consequence, connecting more closely to what the rule, violation,
Yeah.
or infraction was. Or yeah.
And when they come to your office, you're really having to overcome what they're used to when they're talking with a parent, or how their parents are punishing them, or because when they enter into a conversation with their parents, they're not always met with love and understanding, and somebody who's wanting to just hear what they have to say and get to the bottom of it, and you're looking to guide them. And so that seems like an inherent obstacle that you have to overcome.
Yeah. And there was also the challenge of, especially later in the career. I still remember knowing I had to make the call to the parent, and knowing the parent, and knowing what I was going to hear from the parent. And it was basically the same excuses that I was hearing from the kid.
Oh, sure.
Not taking responsibility, that you can't, you shouldn't be doing that to my kid. It's the teacher's fault. It was whatever.
Yeah.
And, sometimes the teacher did play a part in that. And especially early in my career, I came to the conclusion that especially the consequences that didn't match the behavior, um, I realized that the consequence I was doling out was really more for the sake of the teacher or staff member than it was for the kid, you know. And that took some time to kind of change that discussion and paradigm. And I also realized that if there is a conflict between a, a student and an adult in the school, that adult had to be part of the conversation. Otherwise,
Yeah.
we weren't gonna. There's no way I'm gonna sit here and solve the thing miraculously. When here's the conflict is here. So engaging adults with kids was also another. It was kind of a touchy situation because the adult could take offense. It's like, aren't you supporting me? Yes, I am, but I can't solve this issue. That is occurring.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I think we could probably, well, actually I know we can talk for hours
Yeah,
because
we could.
we've done it all weekend. But I know we're up against some time constraints. And so earlier on you had mentioned things are a little bit different than they were when you were growing up. We've talked about the education system a little bit. We've talked about discipline. We've talked about intentionality. And I would love to dive deeper into that sometime. So I think that this
Yeah.
is like part one of many.
Yeah.
But I do want to touch on how awesome it was this weekend to come out here with my son who is approaching middle school. And what a good time to be able to spend time around you. And so I had called you to say, hey, I would love to come down there and do a podcast. You have your grandson who is 12 years old, right around Isaiah's age. And what a good experience for those boys to come together in a place like Montana to do some fishing, to take some trips around on the boat, to build fires. But the thing that I took away was kind of what you've been talking about now is that intentionality. You had asked them one day, what does it look like for an 11 and 12-year-old to and
To serve Jesus.
to serve Jesus?
Yeah.
What does it look like? And then to and then but you didn't ask him that and ask him for an answer right away. You gave him that question early on when we're in the boat and you said, hey, now think about it. We're going to talk about this later. And just to see those wheels turning and to see them, somewhat playing off of each other. And so that guidance through, hey, this is how we can think about things. We can, and then the intentionality there was awesome. And then the other question you had asked was, hey, crew, you're entering into 7th grade. Isaiah's entering into 6th. You've already done middle school. What kind of advice can you offer Isaiah? And man, just to listen to his thoughtfulness, which obviously stems from your father, down to you, down to his father.
Philip, yeah.
And which I'm excited to talk with Philip as well. That's going to be your son. It's going to be an awesome conversation. And in our conversations, you had said, we were talking about jobs and as it pertains to serving the Lord. And you said it's the how, not the what. And so I see, that kind of goes through the thread of our conversation of, it's not that you achieve high status and anything, but it's how you entered and did that.
God's perspective of what we do and how we do it is very different than ours. We get totally hung up on positions and power and I'm a superintendent. Man, I've seen, and I'll say the word lunch ladies because most of the time they're lunch ladies, but I've seen lunch staff influence kids, impact kids' lives far more than any principal or superintendent or teacher. And that's true for a custodian. God does not play, again, my belief is he does not place greater value on being a doctor versus being a ditch digger. There's not many ditch diggers left, but that,
right.
A skilled. Now he wants us to, with that said, he wants us to reach our potential. And if our potential is whatever that may be, but my point is, God is far more interested in how we do our work than what we do, because we know that there's dishonest people at all levels of jobs, and there's also really great people at all levels of jobs. And I remember I don't remember what book and chapter it's in, but but the Lord talking about how I think it was Paul talking about how in everything we do, serve the Lord. And he's not talking about just going to church. He's talking about our work and how do we influence people? How do we love people? How do we we love God and love others, and what does that look like? So the fact that, to me, that opens up equal opportunity for I'll say the plumber, but we also realize that plumbers are making 6-digit salaries now, but the plumber or whatever job versus the lawyer or doctor, again, how we approach that work is what God is concerned about, and how we serve him through that, and how we glorify his name through our work. So that's a key thing. And there's a balance there, because you want your kids to achieve their potential, but again, we get caught up too much in the what and not the how.
Yeah, and I think that there's a conversation in that too, just with sports and pushing kids and how do you manage that. But Mark, what a joy to be here in your man cave, to have spent the weekend with you.
We could tie a fly or two right there.
Yes, that's right. To spend time camping with you, to spend time around you and your wife in your home. Man, I love you.
I love you, Marty. And I tell you what, every time I think of you, I thank God for you. I can't help, and here I'm going to show a little emotion. I just see similarities between my dad and his conversion and your conversion and following Christ, and how there were chains broken that now your kids and family are going to benefit from the rest of their lives and into the next generation. Yeah, it's powerful.
It means a heck of a lot to me, and I want to believe that through your mentorship that I do have piece of your dad.
Yeah.
And in that, the Spirit of God that was in him lives in me and in you. And
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Bless you, man.
Bless you.
Bless your family.
Till next time.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll look forward to it.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.